point, but first aluminium cladding. As London looks up at the scarred frame of Grenfell Tower, we're not far from some of the most expensive homes in Britain. Dozens of people burnt to death in a council apartment building with combustible cladding, no sprinklers and few, if any, working alarms. In cities everywhere, buildings with similar cladding are being checked. In Auckland, two have been found. It's not certain if the cladding is identical, but the council says it's being replaced right now. That at least is known. What's less certain is how many other buildings may have that cladding. Some aluminium composite panels are combustible, some aren't. And risk can be reduced by what's beside those panels, and effective sprinkler systems, adequate alarms, effective fire escapes, and so on. In short, our largest city is doing a high-speed stocktake to assess risk. The warnings that were sounded about Grenfell Tower were ignored and even silenced, but now no one can say they haven't been warned. Ian McCormick is Auckland Council's Building Control GM.
We've got 90 buildings that we've identified that have an aluminium composite panel on them.
Which sounds frighteningly large, but, and this is a but of mitigation,
some of that cladding system is fire-rated aluminium composite panel.
And some don't. The obvious question now is how many of those 90 buildings have combustible panels? And that's what the council is now working to find out. Okay, so there are 90 and you are checking each one?
Yes, we are.
Building by building?
Yes.
Combustible panels are no longer acceptable from certain heights, but some do exist.
You could have combustible cladding up to a height of 25 metres.
That's about 7 stories and way too high for people to get safely out in a catastrophic fire. So
now, if you've got a building that's over 7 metres in height, then it has to have non-combustible cladding.
And for those wondering why up to 7 metres is still acceptable, well, this isn't a one-size-fits-all exercise. New Zealand, for example, has hundreds of thousands of weatherboard homes. Wood is a combustible cladding. Still, in Auckland, there are an unknown number of buildings of heights that make escape difficult to impossible with very serious fire below with combustible cladding. How many? That's what the council's trying to find out. And when do you think that that might be achieved?
Well, we'll be expecting to have this review completed in probably the next 3 or 4 weeks. That's what I'm sort of hoping for, and that'll give us a good view at that time. So it shouldn't take us too long.
Any time would appear too long in the context of Grenfell Tower, which burnt without the possibility of rescue for residents on its highest floors, in a way that almost beggars belief in London in the 21st century. But Ian McCormick is adamant there is not a Grenfell Tower in Auckland.
The combination of attributes of the building in London, as I understand it from the media reports and the other sources of information that I have, is not a combination that you will find in Auckland.
And why not? So what happened in the Grenfell Tower that isn't happening in Auckland?
Okay, my understanding of that building is that first of all, it didn't have a sprinkler system. Second thing about it, it doesn't appear, there seems to have been some problems with the alarms and smoke and fire detectors in that building. It's also seems to have had it's obviously got it's got a number of different features that you wouldn't find here. So,
sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but is that an absolutely categorical assurance? So what you were telling me is that there is no building in Auckland with the combination of no sprinkler systems and an adequate alarm system and combustible cladding?
That's correct, at that height.
At that height?
Yes.
And at a lower height, well, that's where things become less easy to enforce. If you live in a weatherboard home and you don't have sprinklers, you would absolutely fail fire safety tests for higher buildings. Height increases risk and therefore enforcement.
I think it's really important to understand a couple of things, though. First of all, New Zealand has probably got the most robust fire safety regulatory framework in the world. So that's very important. We've got more But the threshold for having to have sprinklers in a building is lower in New Zealand than any other country. We've got more sprinkled buildings in New Zealand proportionally than any other country as well. So some fire safety is something that that we have done well. So I guess that's a really good thing to understand when we're actually we're confronted by something as appalling as this.
Ian McCormick, so a couple of takeaway points from that. Gosh, I'm sorry I used that phrase. Combustible cladding was allowed in buildings up to 25 metres. It is now 7 metres. We are told that the 2 buildings with combustible cladding of significant height in Auckland are currently being reclad. There is an unknown other number of buildings with combustible claddings, but the council will know that within 3 or 4 weeks and will directly respond as they discover those buildings. The same stocktake is also taking place in Wellington and Christchurch. No buildings of problematic height have been found so far with combustible cladding there.